Let's continue our discussion of covenant. So far, we've talked about what covenant is and why it's important. And two, we've talked about its goal, what covenant is seeking. The covenant is like between two parties, one especially much more powerful, would come now be able to have a face-to-face type relationship. And that's really what God is offering. That no longer do we simply submit to the more powerful party out of fear or simply because we have to, out of obligation, but because now we trust and see and know face to face. So God has now voluntarily lowered himself to come face to face. We can see him and he sees us, and face to face, we deeply trust and love one another and bless one another. That's the goal of covenant, and it's called covenantal union and love. Okay. I want to talk about how this relates to the doctrine of God. Okay. This is a really profound and important subject. And I particularly, it's really very, very relevant in the 21st century as we're living in this very pluralistic time. And people are, can you even know who the true God is? There's there's all these different cultures. There's all these different religions. They have all these different conceptions of God. And I get to theoretically choose. And how can you even know which one's right if any of them are right and which one's true? What I want to offer you today is that covenant is a key. Covenant is a tremendous key to know that the God who offers covenantal love, and that's the true God. Because at the end of the day, isn't that the kind of God you want? If you're looking for a God, if you're a person who doesn't, know what you believe about God, you're not sure if you believe in the God of the Bible or if you believe in any kind of God, don't you want to, know a person, not just, just some kind of impersonal force? And two, don't you want to have a relationship to that person? Because the person's going to have a relationship to persons. And don't you want that relationship to be a beautiful and good relationship? Something more like love? Or you don't want just a God who's just powerfully above us, and now you're just a subject, you're a pawn, you're like a software. He's like, okay, I don't like that software, bleep, delete, let's, get rid of that software and do it again. Actually, you're a person, you're meeting a person, and now he's not just above you, but now we go face to face. You can only have that through covenant, and covenant, that's exactly what covenant is offering. Now, here is something that this is really poorly understood in today's, and I don't know why Christian pastors don't teach this very well anymore. Maybe because they haven't been taught this very well. I think even very good seminaries don't often teach this. I rarely hear this being taught by different pastors, but it's actually a tremendously important piece of an argument for the truth of the Bible and the truth of the God of the Bible and the truth of Christianity. And here's this: if you're going to have some view of God, there's only so many different possibilities as to have different conceptualities of God. Okay. And we've talked about this in some other videos. For instance, we're talking about the different, potential attributes of God. It's like, for instance, Zeus isn't omniscient, like is in the Bible, that is that's apart from which God is not God. That is an essential attribute of the divinity of God himself, of the godness of God. That's of his essence. And if he doesn't have omniscience, then he can't be God. So in the God of the Bible, if he, the Bible claims that if he doesn't have omniscience, he can't be God. Zeus doesn't have that, and of course, Christians don't believe that there's even a real being as Zeus, but the ancient Greeks believed that the king of the pantheon of the gods was Zeus, and he didn't have omniscience. But he was still actually a person. As a person, and beings can have other gods have relationships to Zeus, and Zeus can have relationship to human beings. He came down, and like sometimes he raped a woman, or he liked these and hated them. He cursed these people and loved these people. You can have a relationship to Zeus, okay? But Zeus was not under any obligation to fulfill his blessings. If he wanted to, he could just say, like, I have all the power and get rid of you. It was not a covenantal relationship. Now, I'm just giving you just one kind of historical example. People, well, that's myth and nobody believes that. Well, people used to believe in that as a real God. But let me offer you just a couple of really important possibilities about God. And when you're thinking about God, you have to solve certain questions, certain deep questions. So one is God above us, or is God with us? I want to ask you that question. Is God above us, or is he with us? The theologians use this word, is he transcendent? Does he transcend the world? So he's above the world. He's greater than the world. He's greater than all the cultures. He's greater than all the knowledge of the world. He's greater than even time and history. He's greater than the world. He transcends, right? Is he above us? Or is he with us? And so in the ancient Greek world, if God was above, then how can God be with you? That's an interesting question, right? There's this question of, is God a transcendent God, or is God with us? And if he's with us, how is he with us? Is he part of the system? Is he part of the natural order? Is he part of the order? Is he kind of hold all the order together? But since he's inside of the system, he's with us inside of the system, then isn't he in a sense stuck to the system? The system kind of owns him just as much as he holds the system. The system controls him. See, that's really interesting. He doesn't actually transcend the system because he's beholden to reacting against something else inside the system. Now, the reason I bring this up is the theological words are transcendent inside of, if you're with us inside of the system of the reality of the world, that's called immanence. That's what the theologians use. Transcendence or immanence. And is God a transcendent God, or is he an immanent God? And if he's a transcendent God, can he also still be with us? But if he's above us and transcendent, and doesn't he come to the world all of a sudden, now he has all the power, what is that? But then he comes into the world, now does the world kind of own him? And he's kind of stuck inside the rules of the world and power structures of the world. How does that work? Or if he's inside of the world, because he's always with us, is he above the world too? Or does the world always say an immanence? And I want to offer you, the theologians have two concepts of God. One is deism. And deism is a personal God. And that personal God is above the world, that's transcendent. But you know what? There are people who had a view of a deistic God, that he's almighty, he's a creator, he knows what's righteous and gives us all our laws, and he will even judge us and send us to heaven, like Thomas Jefferson seemed to believe in this type of God, for instance. But they don't usually pray to this God or have a personal relationship with God. Certainly nothing that you can expect is something like a face-to-face relation where this God is obligated to us. No, this kind of God is more deistic. He's above us, but he's not with us. But then there's another conception, which historians have tended to call either pantheism or panentheism. Sometimes they may even use the word monism, that God is one, that all things are one, and everything, you think you're touching like a chair or animals, but really they're all just part of the oneness of all of the life force of everything, and that life force of everything is God, and so it's called monism or pantheism. That is all. God theism is the address of God. Pan is all. God is all, or God is in all. Panentheism. But the problem with that is usually that kind of God is not a person, and you can't have a relationship with, and so you don't, pray through to the force that holds all things together, and you certainly can't have in fact, is there even a face? How can you have a face-to-face relationship and have a love relationship and trust? No, it's just a force, and he's not above the system. Often he's part of the system. So these are two common conceptualities of God, especially if you want to believe in monotheism, that you don't believe there's a God of the sea, there's a God of the sky, there's a God of, like lightning, there's a God of war, those are polytheistic type God. The God is inside the tree, the God is inside the mountain, as a lot of other kinds of cultures have tended to do. So, but, what kind of a God do you believe in? And especially if this God is monotheistic. You believe there's only one God. And it really makes a lot of sense. I mean, if, there's real deep problems of polytheistic gods, like, because your God is my God. It's like, when you were a kid, you're like, well, my dad's stronger than your dad. It's like, I bet you my dad could beat up your dad. I don't know if you were ever, you were a little kid and used to have these kind of arguments and fights. I often did. It's like, my dad's bigger than your dad. My dad's, like better looking than your dad. My dad's richer than your dad. In other words, it's a battle of glories. And you know what? This is baked in. Human beings, we long for there to be a glory. And that's one of the reasons why we're looking for God, a beauty and a worthiness that is so far above us that will give us meaning and purpose in our life. And if there's polytheism, then we just have competing glories and competing gods. And usually it causes competing pride, competing self-righteousness, competing hatreds, and war and enmity. That's so the war. If the world is only polytheism, it's just war from here on out. There'll never be peace and oneness. Okay, but what if there's one God? If there's one God, then what kind of God are we talking about here? Is he above all things? Then the option has been deism. He's personal, but you can't really have a relationship because he's outside of the system. He's above time and so forth. Or even the Greeks believed there was God, if they even called it God, like the forms. Plato called it the forms, but he wasn't even a person. It's kind of like it's a transcendent power that holds all things together and is not beholden to the laws and the way things work inside of time and history and the system of the world that we know. It's above us, it's transcendent, but there's no relationship. So the Greeks believed in impersonal forms. Thomas Jefferson and others believe deism, but you can't have a relationship. There's no love relationship. There's only submission. There's only obedience. There's fear because he can judge you, deism. And then you had Hindus and you had Buddhists. Not all Buddhists believe in a pantheistic, but they believe in something like pantheism, where there's, all these forces. There's the yin and the yang, and there's opposing forces that hold all things together. It's a kind of version of pantheism, right? And Hinduism is interesting because it tended to believe that there's one God called Brahma that holds all things together, but then there's a pantheon of other gods. So they kind of they have polytheism, by which you can worship your own distinctive God. And you can say, I worship Krishna, or I worship Vishnu. But really, then there's the ultimate God, which holds all things together, and that's a form of pantheism. So they kind of tend to put pantheism and polytheism, and that's pretty common. In Buddhist countries, they tend to have a pantheistic theology, but then they worship an individual polytheistic type God. That's very common, right? And so you don't have a personal love relationship to God, but only in the Bible. Is there a God who's a person and who has infinite being? That's why we in this previous person and being, the what of God and the who of God. And he offers you personal relationship. He's not beholden and stuck inside the system. He's not only immanent, but he's not only outside the system and, he's just kind of like, let's just see how the software program runs. He's transcendent and he's immanent. And how can he be transcendent, immanent without losing his transcendent authority, or without being, detached from us and not caring about us? Because he's, he's far from us. He doesn't care about what happens down here, because, it's like a software program that he just started, and now, he's like, I'm the deistic software maker, right? I'm the architect of the whole system. That's like a deist. Instead, how can this God love us? And the answer of the Bible is covenant. That God could be wholly himself in his transcendence, and God could be wholly himself when he voluntarily condescends, according to Westminster, that's the language, when he voluntarily comes down and he stays true to who he is, and he is with us. And then through covenant, he voluntarily binds himself so that he can't just erase us and just start the program all over again or just get rid of us. Instead, he now voluntarily obligates and binds himself under curse and fail his divinity and offer to us face-to-face love, deep one-to-one type, this face-to-face type oneness of relationship. That's covenant. So this is offered to us through the God of the Bible and nowhere else. This, I think, is a real deep, profound indicator. It kind of, I don't know if proof is the right word, but it's certainly a piece of profound evidence that this God put this kind of desire in our hearts. And this is the only God that's like this out there. The God of the Bible, who binds himself through covenant and offers us the deep oneness of covenantal love.